Okay, so today I wanted to record a bit of a clarification video. So maybe you watch my videos for health recovery, for, relieving symptoms if you're struggling with a chronic illness. And maybe you see that I use the term awakening a lot, right? I put it on my video titles. I talk about it in my live streams, in my videos. I talk about awakening alongside chronic illness recovery. So maybe the thought comes to mind for you, Kyle, why do you talk about awakening so much? I don't like the term. It's too spiritual. Can't you just talk about chronic illness recovery? Can't you drop the term awakening? Or what is this awakening nonsense? Why do you talk about it? Or maybe maybe you're not averse to it, but maybe you just don't understand it. I talk about awakening here and there, but what is awakening? Is it this? Is it that? So that's why I wanted to record a clarification video, because I'm going to continue talking about awakening, probably more so. I'm going to interview people who also talk about awakening to help you, and because it's what I'm most interested in, right? So let's start with this. The reason I talk about awakening so much is because it was fundamental to my journey, right? So I can't talk about full recovery without sharing my experience on this awakening journey as well. It would be inauthentic. It just wouldn't work, right? If I'm sharing from my journey on how I recovered from chronic illness, it was through taking up this exploration of awakening. Okay, so I can't not talk about it. So what is it? What is this awakening thing? Well, it's very difficult to talk about, but there's a few aspects of it that we can talk about. One of the most important aspects of it is it's got to do with ending your own suffering, right? It's got to do with if you've been feeling in life that something isn't right. Life just doesn't flow, right? There has to be more to life. Why am I here? Why am I suffering so much? This being a human thing, it's a bit shit, maybe. So maybe you've been, and maybe religion doesn't resonate with you. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. That doesn't really matter for awakening. It doesn't matter if you're interested in spirituality or not. What matters is whether you want to end your own suffering, right? Whether a part of you has just been feeling for so long that there's something not quite right about you, that you just don't flow in life the way maybe it looks like some people do. That's what it was for me, right? Growing up, when I was a young kid, life was pretty fun. I enjoyed it. And then I got to my teenage years and I started suffering. I started feeling like there's something wrong with me. I'm anxious. I'm not able to relax around other people. I would have these thoughts all the time saying there's something wrong with me. And then there would be this trying to control life, right? Trying to cling to the times when it felt like there was something less wrong with me, right? Maybe in the social situations where I felt more at ease, it would come occasionally, life would flow a little bit. And then the mind would try to be like, how do I recreate this? And then there would be the situations where I felt more uncomfortable. And then it would be like, I've lost this. I've lost my confidence. I've lost my ability to for me, I remember the thoughts were a lot about confidence, about I need to get my confidence back. I need to create an identity so that people can't see how much I'm suffering. So people can't see all this anxiety that I carry around with me. That's one of the aspects of the suffering thing is we want to hide it so much. The mind wants to hide it. It feels like I have to do whatever I can to portray this image that nobody else knows that I actually feel like this at my core, right? That I feel this shame. Maybe the word suffering sounds strong. It doesn't even need to be really intense suffering. Often really intense suffering is very helpful for awakening. It is what's saying that you're not experiencing life correctly. But for me as well, it was from a curiosity perspective, right? So as I started as this chronic illness situation was happening in my life, I ended the relationship I was in. I stopped my studies, and during that period, I became interested in philosophy. I became really curious about things in my life that I wouldn't have otherwise explored if things were just fine and dandy. Because I was going through a challenging period, I started to look deeper. I started to ask deeper questions. What is actually going on here? Who am I? What is life? What is this life thing, right? And then like philosophy and physics to understand that. And I was finding it fascinating, but the more I studied philosophy and physics, the more I realized that it's just endless theory, right? There was some really helpful stuff there, but I realized that, it's just theory after theory after theory, and knowledge piled on top of knowledge. Like if you look at philosophy, it's just, I would have to read books and books and books. And I was starting this, but at the same time I was struggling with a chronic illness. So reading heavy, dry philosophical text was quite tough. And then I was getting introduced to spirituality. So I wasn't thinking of spirituality, but I started practicing mindful meditation because it helped my symptoms. It made me feel better. And it calmed the anxiety and all the pain in my mind and all the struggle. And it just started to make sense. It just started to resonate, right? I listened to Sam Harris, and he was a great entry point for me because he talks about philosophy and neuroscience and spirituality, right? He's a very great entry point for the hyper-analytical scientific mind, which was me at the time. I was very averse to religion and spiritual terminology. So finding Sam Harris's app where he would talk about all of this, it was just fascinating for my mind. There was just a part of me saying yes. I didn't think of this at the time, but I can look back at my path and see how that is the awakening journey beginning, right? That is a part of you resonating with awakening, somebody else that's had some insight, sharing that insight, and a part of you resonates with that. Again, it didn't feel like that to me at the time, but I can reflect back and see that's what it was. And then I went deeper and deeper, and I won't make this video too long, but eventually I came across Angelo DeLullo. Once I'd started investigating meditation on a deeper level and hearing about different traditions that would all talk about the same kind of insights in different ways. And then there's non-duality, right? There's radical non-duality, because Sam Harris would interview people talking from this non-duality perspective, and it makes the message very clear. It's like there's no self, there's no you at the center of your experience that is suffering. And there's pros and cons to non-dual talk, right? Maybe I'll make a video on this at some point, but that message was very powerful for me. Eventually, at the right time, it can pop you, but it has a lot of negative possibilities in the way the mind can interpret it, right? So hearing Sam Harris talk about no free will, no self, no agency, no controller, that kind of stuff, when there is still a strong sense of ego combined with a lot of emotional repression, will create a very difficult inner experience, right? For me, it was like, well, I've still got all this suffering, but there's nothing I can do about it. So that's why I really recommend Angelo DeLullo's stuff, because he doesn't fixate in any area. He doesn't talk too much from the non-dual perspective, and he doesn't talk too much from a seeking in the future perspective. He's just right in the middle. So yeah, that was my experience coming into interest in awakening, awakening, sparking its interest in me. And so it was a combination of suffering and curiosity, and then a willingness to go deep, like I always say. But to come back to where I started this video, like what is awakening? And it is, one way to talk about it is that realization that I was talking about now, about that the way non-dual speakers talk, that the realization that there really is no you thinking your thoughts. There really is no you that the thoughts are all about, right? The mind is saying, I'm struggling with this. This is my life. This is my problem. Awakening is the shift in your way of experiencing reality, where it no longer feels like you are the separate individual who has to navigate your way through your life and fix your problems. What's important here is it's not an intellectual understanding. It's not about you understanding what I'm saying. That's the first step, right? The first step is probably listening to enough content, maybe non-dual speakers, maybe reading texts, right? Listening to Sam Harris. Okay, eventually understanding, okay, intellectually I grasp that I can see how there is no individual in experience. There's just the flow of experience. Often that's a big barrier, right? There's like the intellectual awakening, but that's not what I'm talking about. That's not awakening. That's an intellectual shift and it's powerful. But awakening is when you know deeply, and there's a massive relief of suffering with this knowing that you don't have to solve this massive problem called your life. You realize that you are life. You are not separate from life, fighting with it, right? You realize that it's all one. And the way I'm talking about this, the mind can imagine some massive spiritual experience, right? Oh, I realize oneness with all that is. That's not how it felt for me. It was difficult to kind of realize when it had happened. I only actually realized it months afterwards that, oh shit, that was the awakening. It just felt like the end of my struggle with life, really. It just felt like, there was still some struggle. It felt like a massive layer had been taken off. And what it felt like for me in the moment, it wasn't like one big bang. It kind of happened over time, over months. It's so synonymous with my recovery journey, right? But I was more interested in awakening than recovery, and then recovery followed alongside because all the resistance dropped, all the fear dropped with awakening. But what it felt like was the thoughts. They're just thoughts. That's a massive part of it, right? It's like the identification with the mind is seen clearly to just be thoughts. And, for different people, it happens in different ways and whatnot. But this is what I'm talking about when I talk about awakening. So another important part of awakening is understanding that is the first step in the journey, right? That's the way Angelo talks about it. And I like Angelo's explanation the best, and his stages of awakening as well. For any of you wondering who Angelo is, his name is Angelo DeLullo. His YouTube channel is Simply Always Awake, and his book is called Awake, It's Your Turn. If you just Google Simply Always Awake, you'll find his stuff. So the stages of awakening go like first awakening, which is the shift that I talk about, this realization that you're not separate from life, you're not your thoughts, and there is no one that's actually suffering. That's part of what it felt like for me. It was like realizing that, oh my goodness, the thought saying I'm suffering so much is just a thought. There's no one actually suffering. And that's the massive relief, right? Then you can still get caught up in your thoughts, but there's a part of you that is untouched, kind of. So the next stage of awakening that's the first awakening, right? And that often has like a honeymoon period. That often has a phase where life just flows. That's what it felt like for me. That's why I say it was synonymous with full recovery, because from there, without the fear, I could really address the final aspects of my recovery, push myself in the areas where I hadn't pushed yet, and there just wasn't any fear anymore because of the awakening stuff. But again, it didn't feel spiritual. It didn't even feel like it had an awakening. I was still watching all of Angelo's content, wondering when this awakening thing was going to happen, but my life just felt like flow. It just felt like, cool, I can do whatever I want. And I hadn't realized that's the first step. That's the first barrier. But the reason it didn't feel like what Angelo was talking about is because it is only the first step. There's still a lot of ego left. It's like a big hit to the ego. And it's, a seeing that there's something beyond it and a knowing that never goes away. But now you get the shadow work phase, which is all of your repressed emotional material, all of your resistance patterns, all of your avoidance patterns coming into your experience in a way that they never had before. So sometimes this period after first awakening can be more intense suffering than you've ever had before, but there's a caveat to what I'm going to say here. At the same time, you don't get caught up in the suffering in the way you used to, right? So it's more intense because you can't avoid it through mental identities like you could in the past, right? You can't try to, seek whatever, seek in the future, imagine this, imagine that. You just see that was never doing anything in any case. It was just, Angelo often says, it was just rearranging rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. It doesn't do anything, right? The suffering is still there. You're just rearranging the thoughts. So after awakening, you don't have these coping mechanisms anymore. You can't distract yourself in the way you used to. But the pull to distract can still come up, right? The desire to distract yourself comes up strongly, but it doesn't do anything. So for me, this kind of 1.5 year period after first awakening was intense. But at the same time, I knew that I don't get caught up in the stuff in the way I used to. Like, real fear can arise, but you see it as fear. You don't see it as you. You see confusion as confusion, not as you. You still get caught up in the thoughts sometimes, but as I said, it's a vastly different experience to beforehand, when you really believed that you were the thoughts saying, I suck, I am not good enough at life, right? The thoughts just have 95% less weight, but there's still stuff coming up. And a lot of this can be physical, right? There can be a lot of physical discomfort that comes up in the body, but you don't see it as symptoms anymore. This is how it was for me. It wasn't symptoms anymore. It was just part of the awakening journey. So it's like, wow, I have a lot to process here. Like, wow, this emotion work that's coming up is bringing a lot of physical stuff with it, but without the fear of, oh no, I'm having a chronic illness. It's a vastly different experience. And then once you've navigated the shadow work and you've gone deep and you keep inquiring and you do the work, which can be really difficult, and there can be resistance at first, then you get to what's called liberation. Again, I'm just sharing Angelo's explanation of the path, but it really resonates with my own experience, and I've been exploring this enough from so many different teachers that this is the stages of awakening that resonates with me the most. There's many different ones. There's the 10 fetters approach. There's many, but Angelo's is nice and simple. So liberation is now when that first shift that you had is really sticks, right? There really is no more suffering. It really is the end of your suffering in this lifetime, and it really is possible. So that's the whole point of this video, right? Is I want to tell you the reason I'm talking about awakening is because I want you to know that it is possible for you to end your suffering in this lifetime entirely. The end of personal suffering. What an amazing possibility, right? And this is why I talk about it, because I read Angelo's book, and again, I'd had enough, like 1.5 years of meditation and delving into this stuff, that it really resonated. I can see when I recommend Angelo's book to someone and they're kind of new to the subject, there'll be a lot of doubt still. But for me, it was like the final piece of the puzzle, right? I'd heard Sam Harris talk about this. I'd heard the non-dual speakers talk about this. I saw how it aligned with science and the real far reaches of kind of consciousness studies and all of those kind of things. It all just fitted into place. But what was most powerful was realizing that, oh my gosh, the suffering that I've been carrying around with me all my life, or, since I ended my childhood years and the suffering began, it doesn't have to stay like this. It is possible to completely end my suffering, because, I'd heard with meditation and stuff that you can relax your mind, you can cultivate peace, but I didn't know it was possible to entirely end your suffering. So that's liberation, right? And that's the at the end of the emotion work and the shadow work. And then there's clarifying the non-dual states or the non-dual fields, right? So seeing, where does it still feel like there's a me? Does it feel like there's a me in the visual field? Does it feel like there's a me in listening, right? If someone's talking, does it feel like I'm listening to what's being said? Does it feel like that's a tree and here is me, right? That's really late stage stuff. So don't worry if you listen to some non-dual pointing early on and you just feel like there's still a strong sense of you. That's fine. That's where I got stuck for a while early on, until Angelo pointed out that for first awakening in the early stages, you actually want to look for the sense of you and rest in it. You want to feel into the feeling of I am. the feeling of I, the feeling of you, that no matter what experience is happening, there's always some common part of your experience, right? If you really stop and explore that, if you think from the moment you were born till this moment, and every single moment in between, there's something in your experience that has never changed. And it feels like you, right? It feels like the me that, okay, this happened to me, and then this happened to me, and this happened to me. And there's always the me experiencing it. And there is a feeling there. And that's what you want to explore, right? You don't want to try to imagine the visual field without a you. That's the final stage of stuff. That's clarifying the non-dual fields. So I wanted to just touch on that as well, because I used to listen to Sam Harris a lot, and he would talk about this, look for the seer, look for the hearer, and see that there is no seer, that there is no hearer. But until you've had first awakening and you've clarified and you've done all of the shadow work, that's not going to be clear at all. And it's just going to frustrate you, really. So that's the video I wanted to make, talking about awakening. And if this interests you, my favorite book is Angelo's book, Awake. It's your turn. And his channel is Simply Always Awake. And if you do check out his channel, he has a shitload of videos. So I recommend going through it by playlist. He's got Basics of Awakening, Introduction to Awakening series, I think it is, Inquiry, Consciousness, and Awakening Approaches. Those are the ones that I would recommend for somebody starting out. And then later on in the path, there's Equanimity, which is good if you feel like you're getting triggered a lot, right? You've had this first insight, but you still have a lot of suffering, right? People still piss you off, or you don't want to get pissed off, but you do. You still get triggered. Then you need to do equanimity work. And then there's the non-dual clarification and the no self clarification. So yeah, I felt like this clarification video was necessary because I talk a lot about awakening. And I also want the freedom to be able to talk about it more, and that people can know what I'm talking about. The last thing I want to say about awakening is it's possible for anybody. It's got nothing to do with spiritual beliefs, religious beliefs, but it doesn't exclude spiritual beliefs and religious beliefs. It's got nothing to do with who the mind thinks it is, whether you think, is it possible for somebody that's smart or not smart, or somebody that's sick or healthy? It's possible for anybody. Last thing is you have to lose a lot. You lose all the illusion of the mind. So Angelo's book starts with warning that it's not about sunshine and rainbows. Sure, you get to liberation, which is just, this is where I feel like I'm getting towards. I've done a lot of shadow work and things just feel light and flowy again. And it's worth it. It's absolutely worth it. But you have to feel into so much difficult stuff along the way. So if you're down for the ride, it's worth it. But be warned, right? It's not just about increasing states of pleasure. It's about integrating the shadow entirely. And once the shadow is entirely integrated, there's freedom, because there's nothing to run from anymore. There's nothing to avoid. There's nothing to hide from. There's no need to control experience to not have this experience and rather have that experience. There's just experience. So this has been my journey, and I'm still clarifying the later stages of it, but it's impossible for me to talk about recovery without talking about this. And if I'm using this channel to try and help people to end their own suffering, then awakening is probably the most important thing I could talk about on this channel. And I will try to keep integrating awakening and chronic illness recovery and how the two overlap way more than you ever realize, because there is no separation. There is no my life and awakening and my chronic illness and that person and that person. There's just this happening. So I hope that video is helpful. And even if it doesn't entirely resonate, right, just to see if it sparks your interest at all. And if you're watching my videos, you're on the right path, because somebody who wasn't interested at all would have stopped watching my videos a long time ago. Or they would not get this deep into this video because it would just not make sense. So even if it's not entirely clear, if there's some part of you that kind of resonates with what I'm saying, then you're on the right path, and you will keep going. All right, all the best.